All right, everybody. This is Brian Henson. Brian, say
Hello.
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 As everybody knows, I've been doing these little like master classes. I've been talking to people that I think are like really brilliant and smart, and I'm not even worthy to be on the same Zoom call with Brian Henson at the moment.
That's ridiculous.
Well, I have to say it anyway, Brian, but it's true. So, Brian, this is, by the way, Brian is the chairman of the Jim Henson Company. He runs the Henson Company. He's an amazing guy. But the first time I ever met you, Brian, you probably don't remember this. And so I had written a pilot for the Henson Company back in like '99 or something. It was called Robot Dog. And based on,
yeah, I remember Robot Dog, sure.
Yeah. So then, sort of years went by and we were doing stuff. And then I got a call saying, did I want to come and participate in a improv workshop with puppeteers? And I was like, okay, fine. So I showed up. I remember it was on a Wednesday night. Was that maybe 2006? And it was like, you'll just show up, you'll go to a room and you'll do improv with puppeteers. And I'd never had my hand in a puppet. And I remember I met you and you were very nice, you were very gracious. We all sat in the screening room and I sat there in the back with the world's best puppeteers. And I just sort of sat there and I was dreading the director, Patrick Bristow, and he said, all right, Paul, you go up. And I've never in my life had so much flop sweat, because you guys would all grab a puppet and then you would do improv. And so I was like, what do I do? And you had puppets with cables and eyes and I didn't know anything. So I was like, what do I do? And I quickly grabbed a penguin because it was just a mouth. And I think that if I were to list like the most intimidating moments in my life, it was like that, because it was like, what am I doing in front of Brian Henson and Bill Beretta and all? And anyway, that is my introduction to Brian Henson.
Well, and I also think it's pretty hilarious remembering all that, because Patrick didn't tell me he was going to tell you to come up and puppeteer.
Oh.
No, because at the time you were coming really to watch and observe as a writer and thinking, because what we were doing with that workshop was, which eventually became the stage show Puppet Up Uncensored. But what we were doing with that workshop was we were trying to find a new tone of comedy, a fresh, fast tone of comedy for puppets. And then we wanted to kind of share that with really fun writer creators, share that tone. So you were initially the first like writer creator invited into the room to sort of feel what that tone was. And then it was like you picked up a puppet, and then I was like, he's fantastic. He's terrible. He's a terrible puppeteer, but he's so funny and he's got such fresh ideas that then before you knew it, you were part of the performing troupe, but it wasn't actually the original plan.
Oh, that is funny. Yeah, because, and then, it was awful. I didn't even know how you guys did it, that you had a camera and monitors on the floor, and when you look left, it's flopped to right, and I was like, I don't know how you did it. But let's talk about Puppet Up, because I think that was an amazing, what gave you the idea? You were just like, I want to shake things up, or what?
Well, it was basically what I was saying. Well, honestly, we had gotten to the point where even on the Muppet shoots, our performers, who are great performers, had gotten to the point where if somebody missed their line, the next performer would go, oh, we have to cut. Somebody forgot so-and-so didn't say their line. And I was like, wow, we've gotten so distanced from the creative performing. We've all become so word bound, and it wasn't as funny as it should be. And it wasn't fresh, and it didn't have spark. And my dad I had always trained puppeteers for my father. And we used to say we trained 20 puppeteers to get 2. So 10 to get 1.
Right.
And because we trained 10 to be good puppeteers, and one of them would be what my dad would say, good at ad-libbing. And the good ad-libbers were funny and were the ones who could create characters. And that's when I got together with Patrick Bristow, and I said, I think we've been, as a company, all the way back to the beginning with my dad, have been getting it wrong, because we need puppeteers who are ad-libbers, who have that spark that's going, which Frank Oz had naturally, my dad had naturally, the other core Muppet performers had naturally. But the way we've been adding performers over the years was like not finding the ad-libbers. And then I realized, wow, short form comedy improv, like Patrick Bristow teaches and is a master of doing himself, is that. So that's when we decided this would be a way of finding that real good, new, fresh, funny that puppets could be, was by using the puppeteers, who are good ad-libbers, good improvisers, and then start really finding a new tone of comedy. And then the plan was, once we sort of find that, we'll start writing to it. And what we didn't expect was Patrick said, let's put the group up in front of an audience, just here in the studio. So we made, at our stage in Hollywood, we made our stage into a theater for one night. And we just basically did our workshop in front of an invited audience.
Right.
And invited meaning friends and family and stuff like that. And just to see if it got even funnier when you put the pressure of the live performance. And it kind of did. It did get even funnier. And it happened to be the producers of the Aspen Comedy Festival were there. And at the end of the show, they came up to me and said, Brian, you've got to bring this show to the Aspen Comedy Festival. And I said, it isn't a show. This is a workshop. This is just a workshop. We were just doing a little demonstration. And they said, whatever you just did, bring it to Aspen. So then we went to Aspen, and I think we named the show the Jim Henson Company's Experimental Puppet Improv Show or something. It's like, it didn't have a name, but it was and then it was the big, that comedy festival was only like 3 days. And it was the big hit of the festival, lines around the block. And then while we were there, somebody from the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, producers from there were in the audience, and they came up and said, bring this to Edinburgh. You have to bring it to Edinburgh. And I said, well, it isn't even a show. It's just and they said, well, you have to bring it, whatever you want to call it. So then that's when we named the show Puppet Up. I think you were part of.
Yeah. I went to Aspen with you, and then.
No. I know you went to Aspen. I think you were the one who suggested, let's call the show Puppet Up, because.
Maybe. I don't know. That sounds way too intelligent for me. But
no, well, at that point, we already had the audience yelling Puppet Up. So the tradition of the term Puppet Up started with, when we do the Muppets or any puppet production, the puppets can be so heavy that the last cue to the crew is Puppet Up, and then the director calls action. So whereas on a normal set, you'd hear, in the old days, you'd hear turnover, which meant roll the cameras. Then you'd hear speed, which meant the sound department was recording. And then you'd hear the director call and action. Well, with puppets, we put one more cue that the first AD gives between speed and action, which is Puppet Up. So that on a puppet shoot, you'd go turnover, speed, Puppet Up, and all the puppets would shoot up into position, and then the director would call action so that people's arms wouldn't collapse before the end of the take, so that they could rest right up until that moment before action. So we, in our workshops, were just going, okay, guys, let's puppet up. And because that's a term we always were using. That's what we've always used on the floors. And then Patrick Bristow got the audience yelling Puppet Up to us. And I think you said, I think it was you, Paul, who said, I think we should call the show Puppet Up.
It could be.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, I remember we actually got there, and again, because of and I really loved this because we thought it was still the experimental show. We're just having a good time. And then I think we got there and we're like, geez, we don't have a song, right? We don't have an opening to our, so I remember we all met one night and we wrote the song that you guys are still using today.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And remember, we split into little groups.
Yeah.
We said, you got to write the first verse.
Right.
You got to write the second verse. You got to write the bridge. You got to write the last verse.
Yeah. All right. So so this is another disastrous, my experience, not disastrous, but so maybe people don't know, but some of the puppets, they require a person to do the left hand. No, right. Okay.
If the puppeteer is right-handed, then you need somebody doing your right hand of your puppet.
So you would usually grab a big puppet for one of our improvs, and you would say, and someone would come from the, like one of the cast would come, and one of the more seasoned professionals, which were all of them, and they would come and do that for you. And so I remember one time you got up there and you're like, okay, and you got up and you turned and everyone was busy. You said, Paul, come and help me. And I was like, okay. And I remember I took one of the wrong hands and
you put your wrong hand in. I remember that. You put your left hand in the right hand of the puppet.
It was like I'm never doing that ever again because it looked terrible. Oh well. But yeah, from that, I remember I'd never traveled for work before, except when I worked for you. We went to Aspen, Edinburgh, and then a month in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cool. That was I liked those days. So Brian, do you remember your first time on set with your dad? What it was? I mean, I'm sure you were there a lot, but do you remember the first time where you knew what was going on?
No.
No? Wow.
Well, I grew up around it, so
right.
I didn't know that I was in a circus family until I was old enough to realize, oh, my family's different. When you're a little kid, it all seems perfectly normal. My dad is carving a dog, and then he's going to make it into a puppet. But my dad, one thing, he did generally not bring the work home. And that's because he was a proper work addicted to working. Right. He used to have to force himself to stop working for his health. And like in the beginning of Sesame Street, I remember he would go to work for 72 hours sometimes and come back. And between him and Don Saline and Frank Oz, they used to do what 30 people do nowadays. They did all the animations. They did all the puppet segments. They did everything. And so my dad was a proper workaholic. And so when he would force himself, I got to go home. I got to be a dad. I've got 5 kids. He didn't work much at home. He did, though, bring like the old puppets home. And we would always watch them on TV. The one cool thing was my dad, in those early days, he would do the Ed Sullivan Show, and he would do those late shows, Johnny Carson and stuff like that. And we would be allowed to stay awake until 11 or 11:30 and watch my dad on TV. Because in those days, nothing was recorded. There was no way. If you didn't see it live, you will never see it. Right. Johnny Carson, if you didn't watch it live, you'd never see it. There were no videotaping. There was no rerunning of episodes back then. So I just always grew up around it. And because my dad was a workaholic, us kids would end up going to work with him quite a lot as a way to see him. And like if he was working the weekends, as he would often do, he would bring if he was working the weekend, he'd always bring one of us to work with him. And then we would just be there. And then of course he'd dive straight into whatever he was doing. He'd be like, "Okay, Brian, have fun. Remember, we go home in 14 hours." And then I'd hang out in the workshops and I'd play with eyeballs and I'd make little puppets and weird little things that I would do. So I was just sort of around it all the time. So I can't really tell you when it was like impactful to me as oh, I'm watching my dad work. That was just always that was what my dad was. That's what he was.
Right.
I remember thinking it was incredible when he and the other puppeteers would start laughing at something so hard they couldn't stop laughing. And that to me was like, wait a second, that's what kids do. Adults don't do that. They don't do that. They don't laugh that hard. And I remember being delighted by that. And I guess the first thing, when he asked me to do some of the counting films, some of the short films for Sesame Street as an actor, when I was 6 years old. And I did 3 Ps, I did 5 quarters, I did one called 10 Little Indians, which not surprisingly has not been seen in the last 20 years. Because in the end it was decided, no, you don't do 10 Little Indians anymore, which is right and proper. But I do remember when I went to do those first inserts, and he was my director, and there was a different expectation clearly from me. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, Brian, you need to be on it, and you need to do exactly what I'm telling you to do, and do it exactly right, and do it every time exactly right. You know? I was like, oh, okay. And that was a lot of fun. And I remember after the first weekend of shooting, I got home, and the next morning he made this big deal of, I'm going to eat breakfast with Brian alone. And so we're sitting eating breakfast in the house, and he said, okay, Brian, here's your pay for the work you just did. It's a $50 check. And I was like, that's a huge amount of money. I mean, when I was like, $50? Our weekly allowance was 25 cents a week. And so I was like, $50. And he said, yes, it's yours. But now I'm going to take you, and we're going to go to the bank. And you are going to open a bank account. You're going to meet the bank manager. You're going to open a bank account, and he's going to explain to you how bank accounts work. And sure enough, we go to the bank. And back in those days, a 6-year-old could have a bank account. I tried doing this with my son when he was like 13. And I brought him to the bank, and the bank manager was like, a 13-year-old can't open an account. I was like, what are you talking about?
You talk about...
Anyway, so that was me working with him. And then later, I then did start working properly with him, probably when I was 16. I made puppets and all when I was 13, 14, 15 for the Muppets. I made the first Muppet Penguin. I made lots of the Muppet talking vegetables and stuff like that. And then I was I enjoyed marionettes when I was a kid, probably because that was my what do you call it? That was me veering from my dad. Like,
be a rebel.
You do hand puppets. I'm going to do marionettes. And so I was into marionettes and building them and stringing them and trying to get it. And then so my dad would bring me in when he had marionette effects that needed doing, and that meant I did the bicycle scene with Kermit and Piggy in The Great Muppet Caper, and that was really hard work to figure it out. And that was really the first time I felt like, oh, I'm really working with my father, and it's really important that I get this right. And that was probably that experience that made me think, I really enjoy working with my father. And then as I got older, and I did 1 year of college, and then I was transferring to another college, and I never got there because I did a movie. So I postponed it, and then I did another movie, and then another one, and then eventually I said, I'm not going to college. And I was just working, and by the time when I did Labyrinth with my dad, that was really terrific. By then I had 3 people who worked kind of with me, and we were a team going from movie to movie, and then came on to my dad's movie. So I was known in the British industry, and now we were working under my dad, and I had a really lovely time on Labyrinth. That was sort of the one time where the fact that we were father and son was a lovely thing that was now over here.
Right.
And now I was his puppet coordinator and running the puppeteers on the movie. and that was a really lovely project to do with him. And he lived for another couple of years, but not long after that.
Wow. Is it? Do you ever? I mean, to be part of such iconic movies and projects, do you ever go, wow, that's like, it's so ingrained in the psyche? And I'm sure you're used to it and stuff, but when you mention Labyrinth, I mean, these iconic, projects, there's no question there. That's just weird. That's just amazing. Like,
well, I think what I learned from my dad was always do something original.
right.
Don't do something derivative. Do something that's original as you can be. And if you are original, it'll find its audience. It'll find it, because actually, my dad made Dark Crystal, and it was considered medium successful. It was a little bit too far out there. Originally, and I was in school during Dark Crystal, so I worked a little bit in the summer break or something, but I wasn't working on that movie. And then when he set out to do Labyrinth, it was like the audience had made it quite clear. They wanted more funny, like the Muppets. They liked the whole fantasy world of Dark Crystal, but they wanted more funny, and they wanted guest stars like the Muppets. So then, my dad put together Labyrinth, and now there's David Bowie in there,
Right.
Jennifer Connelly. It's a mixture of people and puppets. It's much funnier. He's got Terry Jones writing. And then we released Labyrinth, and it was one of the least successful movies of the year.
Really?
It's unbelievable. When somebody reminded me just how unsuccessful it was, I was like, that can't be right. And I went straight on IMDb, and Labyrinth made less than $10 million in its opening weekend. It was considered a massive flop, and it has grossed more than that every year since it was made.
Wow.
So it wasn't an iconic film. When we made it, it was no Star Wars. It wasn't one of those where it was the must-see movie. It was exactly the opposite. Not many people saw it. Not many people were interested in seeing it. And then as people did start watching it, particularly when video rentals then came about, and people could rent it and go, wait a second, I don't even remember this crazy movie. This is fantastic. And then it just got more and more and more successful over the years because it is so original.
Right. Right. Freakazoid, the show I did, that was a disaster when we did it. I think we were canceled like by show 15, and it was just like, no, this is never going to work. But it has grown in its popularity. So I guess sometimes that's not bad.
You know what? If you tried your hardest and you did things because you thought they were the right thing to do, and not because you thought that's what the network wants you to do, and not because you thought that's what market research was telling you to do, but what you really thought was really the best thing, and you kind of stuck with that. Well, if you fail in that scenario, you haven't failed.
Right.
That's still something really special. And what's happened to me, and exactly what you're saying with Freakazoid, is history will often come back around, and Farscape is another one. Farscape was when we first did that was Star Wars was the big movie science fiction, and Star Trek was the big television science fiction. And we wanted to do this weird new thing, Farscape, and we had a different tone in mind and a different sort of energy. It's sort of brutal, tribal, but also kind of funny at times, a little wilder, it was like we wanted to do the not hippie, but take Star Trek and let them let their hair down and get a little wild. And when we first released Farscape, actually, Farscape, it polarized the critics. Some super loved it, but that's another one where over the years it only got more and more and more and more and more popular. Right. And now and now you get big filmmakers saying their main influence was Farscape, and Farscape basically ended up redefining Star Trek. Then when Star Trek came back with the reboot movies, with Chris Pine, it was like they were suddenly doing the energy that we had created in Farscape, which was cool. We ended up being a chapter in science fiction.
Are we allowed to speak of Earth to Ned, Brian?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Well, no, I think yes. I think that it's been announced.
Okay. Yes. All right.
It has been announced that you and I worked on a show that will be
Yes.
on Disney Plus,
Right.
called
Soon.
Earth to Ned.
But what's amazing, so last summer I auditioned. I mean, the audition process was a while. It was like a month and a half or something. I remember, because you guys it's Earth to Net is probably the most fun I've had, because it was crazy fun and it was nuts. And I think people will really like it. But it's like you talked about. It's there's a lot of improv and there's a lot of craziness. And
well, I think Earth to Ned, as well as other productions that I've done, but basically what doing Puppet Up to find that new tone of puppet comedy, then we used in several productions, Earth to Ned being one of them. Earth to Ned has a tone and an energy, and it's largely improvised, that couldn't have happened in the purely Muppet days prior to doing Puppet Up.
right.
And yeah, it had to take, because it's largely improvised, we had puppets that needed to be personalities that could be spontaneous. And we had two main characters, Ned and his sidekick, Cornelius.
Right.
And that combination had to be great. And so, yeah, we had a whole big round of auditions to find Ned's, plural, and a whole big round of audition to find Cornelius's, plural. And then we had to try every combination of Cornelius and Ned to feel like that's the combination that works. And in the end, that was you and Michael Oosterom.
Yeah, it was great. And so I'm not revealing anything, and then Zoom is going to kick me off in a minute, because I have the free account, Brian. So I don't have
I have the paid account.
But I remember you telling me, you said, Paul, so you're going to do the voice and you'll do the mouth, but there are many other people that are going to be being this puppet with you. There's Alan Troutman, and there's Mick Guinness, and I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. And I was like, Brian, that's impossible. That's not going to work. I mean, if I'm talking, how are we all going to coordinate? And I remember you said, trust me, after a month of working, in rehearsals and stuff, one day it'll all just happen. And I was like, Brian, I think you're getting a little too big for your britches, because that's impossible. And I remember one day, I think it was probably when we finally went to the Chaplin lot, to the Henson Studios. We had a couple weeks there of run-throughs. And one day, doggone it, if the character didn't look like one character, like you would never have thought. And so is that something that you would use throughout the years, or you had a lot of faith in? Because it sounds like it's never going to work. And then people do you start to, what he's going to do, what she's going to do. And it's amazing to me.
Well, truthfully, one thing that I learned a long time ago is you have to promise the impossible. I didn't. I mean, honestly, I didn't really know how well it would work. It worked brilliantly, and there were 7 of you on that character, and you were speaking, and therefore you were the lead puppeteer, because you were voicing. Everybody had to be in sync with you. You were the brain, and but there were 7 puppeteers working with you, and in the past can be a huge problem when we have characters in movies and stuff where there's 7 puppeteers. That you have to do an enormous amount of rehearsals for every little moment. When we did Little Shop of Horrors, we rehearsed for months to do a 3-minute scene. And so part of this character, I can't tell you too much, but this character, he doesn't move. He is the host, because it's part of the creation of him is he's almost growing out of the space that he's in. So you're not expecting him to move. But that's helpful. And then we designed it into his personality, which which I kind of knew you'd be very good at, that his personality would be a little flippant, like he's almost the kind of guy that would forget what his hand is doing.
Right.
You know, I knew that his personality had to not be precision, that he had to be a little bit lost all the time,
right,
because that the technique would deliver that,
right.
whether we wanted it or not. but in the end, it did work extremely well, and it's probably one of the most. It is such a together character. Now that I'm finishing episodes and all, the character is such a complete character that it did surpass what I thought we could do. It is actually much better than I thought.
I remember, Brian, when you called me to say that I got the part as the lead puppeteer, you said, I remember I was sitting on the couch and you said, "Now, Paul, you're going to have to be good at this." I was like, "Okay." And you were like, "No, I'm not kidding. Like, you're going to have to be good at this," which was kind of funny. And so therefore I was like, "Oh my gosh." So I remember going to the workshop, to the creature shop. And we would go there every day, 8 hours a day. It was crazy. I was scared to death, but then it all worked. It was awesome.
No, it didn't just work. It's great, and it's a great character. It's a really great.
Everyone should start looking for To Ned on Disney Plus. And Brian, can we do this again at some point?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
This is fun. I mean, I've been in like board meetings and stuff like that, and this is way more fun. I mean, you introduced me as the chairman of the Jim Henson Company, which is true, and I used to be CEO, but I'm not really a managing chairman, because what I really like to do is I like to do the crazy stuff.
You're right. Yeah.
I like to say to Disney Plus, "No problem. I got this, and this is easy for us. We're going to do this show. It's just, we know exactly how to do it." I have no idea.
That's cool. All right, everyone. So that's Brian Henson, To Ned, all kinds of other things, the Jim Henson Company, and all the amazing things. It's like one of my favorite places to go. And there are dogs that they allow, that people bring their dogs, and it's the most idyllic working environment I've ever been in. So that's cool.
Yeah, well, your dog loves you.
Yeah, well, I get bitten. Oh well. So Brian, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right.